I asked you, demonstrate it exists without begging the question. If you point at the universe, you're begging the question. If you point at what you think is the resurrection, you're begging the question. If you point at the Bible in any way, you're begging the question. If you point at morality, you're begging the question.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Grab a seat because this one is a wild ride. Today, we are sitting in on a clash between Jail Warren on the atheist side and the witness on the Christian side, and it gets intense fast. The whole thing comes down to one demand: prove that God exists without quietly assuming God in the first place. And watching the witness try to wriggle out of that corner is something you have to see for yourself. Stick around all the way through, because the back half is where it really comes apart, and the closing line is honestly too good to spoil here. Trust me, you do not want to tap away early on this one. And before we get rolling, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you are watching from right now. I genuinely love seeing how far this channel reaches. Alright, enough from me. Let's get into it.
So, can you demonstrate that your God exists independent of minds as a cause, as a concrete thing, standing in causal relation to other things without begging the question, yes or no?
Yes, I've been
okay,
doing that
do it without begging the question, and I will fucking interrupt you if you beg the question.
Okay. The contingency of the reality in which
begging
we
the
live,
question.
The resurrection of
begging
Jesus
the question.
Christ,
begging the question.
And objective morality.
Begging the question.
And this is the world in which we live, and we observe.
Begging the question. You are still begging the question. I asked you if you could do it without begging the question. Why are you lying?
Well, just because you say something's begging the question doesn't
mean
it is.
You're assuming the truth of the conclusion in your premises. In order for the resurrection to be true, Jesus must be divine. In order for Jesus to be divine, God must exist. I asked you, how do you know that God exists? You pointed to the thing that would only be true if the God exists, which assumes the God exists for the thing to be true. That's begging the question. You did that in all three things.
I'm not begging the question. I didn't assume God.
Oh, what the living shit? I just explained how you did it.
I'm not starting with God. I'm starting with the reality in which I'm observing.
You can't because you didn't observe a resurrection.
So I'm arguing from these reality facts and evidences to
the resurrection is not a real fact.
That is not begging the question. So I didn't assume God. I'm saying that the universe is
It's not.
contingent.
No, there's no evidence for that.
Because of the evidence, historical evidence we have of the resurrection,
there's no historical evidence.
That morality needs a lawgiver, and so
no, it doesn't. Not if moral anti-realism is true, which there is no logical contradiction there.
The most plausible answer is the Christian God.
So you're begging the question. That's cool. You just conceded it, so that's fine.
Following the evidence.
It's not. And the audience, they get it. They understand that you're begging the question.
You deny the evidences. And you don't get nowhere but your own subjective weird thoughts. That's all you get. There's no logical contradiction.
There's no logical contradiction there. That you don't like it. There's no logical contradiction there, and that you don't like it is irrelevant. You can't just appeal, well, that's just icky to me. That's not an argument, nor is it a defeater.
Okay. Is naturalism true?
As far as we can tell, is where the evidence goes, yes.
Okay, so you're the one begging the question.
No, I'm not, because I'm not stating it as an absolute fact.
So naturalism could not be true.
Is likely to be true. Now, but the problem is, there's nothing else for us to access other than nature itself.
How come when I follow the facts and it leads me to the Christian God, it's me begging the question? But when
I explained how
it leads to naturalism. That's
I explained how. If you had listened in my intro, I did. I explained it in my intro, but you weren't fucking listening.
Well, go ahead.
I was listening to you. You make unnecessary, unjustified ontological assumptions in order to justify those. I'm explaining it to you. I'm explaining it to you right now.
Okay, right out of the gate, this is already over, and I need you to understand why. Jail Warren asks one simple thing: demonstrate your God exists without begging the question, yes or no. And the witness, almost on instinct, blurts out the funniest possible answer. He says, yes, I beg. I know it was a slip of the tongue, but it might be the most honest thing he says the whole exchange, because that is the problem with his entire position. Here's what people don't realize about that little moment. Jail Warren warned him first. He told him plainly, do it without begging the question, and I will interrupt you the second you do. That's not a gotcha. That's the most basic standard in all of reasoning. And the witness walks straight into it anyway. Watch the pattern. Every single thing he reaches for, the contingency of reality, the resurrection, objective morality, every one of them quietly assumes God. Jail Warren breaks it down with surgical clarity. For the resurrection to mean anything, Jesus has to be divine. For Jesus to be divine, God already has to exist. So when you point at the resurrection as your proof, you're pointing at something that's only true if your conclusion is already true. That's the circle. That's the trap closing on him. And then comes the part that made my jaw drop. The witness admits there's no logical contradiction in the alternative, and still says the most plausible answer is the Christian God. That's not following evidence. That's picking the finish line first and sprinting backward to it. Jail Warren clocks it instantly and tells him, you just conceded it. That is how you lose a debate in real time.
You make unjustified assumptions, metaphysical and ontological, regarding specific things that we use in reality. Like, for example, the term knowledge, or the term truth, or justice, or beauty, or whatever. What are called like the transcendentals. You make unfounded, unjustified ontological assumptions, or assumptions about the ontological nature of these things. I hold them to be abstract concepts that we subjectively apply to things in reality to quantify them. Okay? They're just abstract concepts. They don't represent anything objectively real. All right? Now, you say differently. You say that these are real things that are undergirded by the existence of the God that dictates what they are, which means that there is an objective, like mind-independent stance for what beauty is. But there's no evidence that indicates that. In order to make that assumption about the ontological nature of the term, you need to assume that the God exists and is defined a particular way to justify the assumption you're making, which means you are begging the question. You're begging the question of the existence of the thing to do the thing you think it's doing. I asked you, demonstrate it exists without begging the question. If you point at the universe, you're begging the question. If you point at what you think is the resurrection, you're begging the question. If you point at the Bible in any way, you're begging the question. If you point at morality, you're begging the question. Actually, technically, no, you're just wrong, because moral anti-realism is
true at all.
That is true.
So you're saying if I look at real world evidence, when I look at the world around me and observe it, and I look at historical evidence,
because you're special pleading, because you don't hold that. No, because you're special pleading, because you don't hold that same thing for the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas.
If I just follow the evidence and it led me to the Christian God being true, that's begging the question. But when you follow the same evidence and it leads you to naturalism, that's not begging the question.
No, it's not. I explained how it's not.
No, you didn't actually.
Then I will explain it again. Then I'll explain it again.
I'd rather
naturalism. I will explain it again. Okay, we only have access.
Explain your hypocrisy.
I'm explaining it again. It's not hypocrisy. We only have access to nature. We can only demonstrate access to nature. There is the noumenological and the phenomenological. Okay, phenomenological takes place in your head. We don't have access to what's going on in your head, but we have access to nature. Naturalistic explanations are ontologically parsimonious, meaning that they require no additional assumptions that are unnecessary, and they're backed by evidence and novel testable predictions. To assume that there is something other than that, okay, you're assuming that. You can't demonstrate that any particular metaphysical assumption you're making is the case, which is why metaphysics doesn't really do anything.
Actually, I have demonstrated that.
You can't demonstrate a metaphysical assumption. Metaphysics are abstracts. You can't demonstrate them to be the case.
Like logic, math, and morality, right?
This is the part that blows my mind, because the witness tries to flip the whole thing. He accuses Jail Warren of making unjustified assumptions about truth, beauty, justice, the transcendentals. On the surface, it sounds clever, but Jail Warren doesn't flinch. He says those are abstract concepts we apply to reality to describe it, nothing more. They don't have to be real objects floating around somewhere. And then Jail Warren lands the line that should be on a poster. He tells the witness, "You are begging the question of the existence of the thing to do the thing you think it's doing." Read that twice, because it exposes the entire move. You cannot use God to ground beauty until you have actually shown God exists in the first place. Then comes the moment that honestly should end the conversation. Jail Warren just lists it out, one after another. Point at the universe, begging the question. Point at the resurrection, begging the question. Point at the Bible, begging the question. Point at morality, begging the question. There is nowhere left to stand. Every single exit is sealed, and here's the catch a lot of viewers miss. Jail Warren nails him on special pleading. He points out the witness does not apply that same follow the evidence to my God reasoning to the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas. Why not? Because the method only feels valid when it lands on the conclusion you already wanted. That's the tell. That's the whole thing unmasked. And to top it off, J.L. Warren actually offers a positive case. He explains naturalistic explanations are ontologically parsimonious, backed by evidence and testable predictions. That is the difference. One side is doing real work. The other is just assuming the answer and dressing it up.
Those aren't metaphysics. Oh, what the living. Those are abstract. They're abstract. They're languages. They're languages that we utilize to quantify the reality that we perceive.
Right, and they're immaterial, right?
They're descriptive, not prescriptive. Prescriptive is necessitarianism, which is begging the question at its core, because it assumes the existence of the God is defined a certain way to do the thing you think it does.
So, yeah,
whereas regulatory theory acknowledges that these things are descriptive and beholden to our frame of reference.
Yeah, but you're saying they just exist.
What do you mean that? No, they exist because we invented them. They're languages. They're languages.
So 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4 if no minds are around.
Exactly, yeah. Because there's no mind to articulate that.
So
they're technically just objects in space. They're just objects in space. It's an abstract language. It's a language. Math is a language. Logic is a language. They're languages of quantification.
How is that not Platonianism?
Because Platonism asserts that these things exist objectively in the Platonic realm, which I don't hold to. Okay. I don't hold to that.
So my view is that abstracts exist in the necessary mind of God. Right?
That is an unnecessary, unjustified assumption based upon the existence of a God that you're begging the question of.
Well,
demonstrate that the God exists. No. Demonstrate that God exists first.
No mind and no reason.
Demonstrate that God exists. No, you have to demonstrate that God exists and that it is defined in the way you think it is defined, and you have to show the mechanistic relationship between it and the thing you're pointing at. Then it becomes an explanation. Until then, you're just begging the question in your assertion. Come on, man. This is basic philosophy.
And here's where the witness makes his last stand, and it tells you everything. He admits math is a language, logic is a language, that 2 doesn't equal 4 if there's no mind around to articulate it. Fine. But then he turns and asks, how is that not Platonism? And J.L. Warren draws the line cleanly. Platonism says these things exist out there in some separate realm. He doesn't hold that. He says they're descriptive tools, beholden to our frame of reference. Done. So what does the witness do? He plants his flag on the claim that abstracts exist in the necessary mind of God. And that is the whole game right there. He needs God to already exist for that sentence to mean anything, which is the exact circle J.L. Warren has been pointing at this entire time. He didn't escape the trap. He just decorated it. Let me break down why this matters, because this isn't just internet arguing. The fallacy J.L. Warren keeps naming has been understood for over 2,000 years. Aristotle described this exact error, where you quietly smuggle your conclusion into your premise. The name later philosophers gave it, petitio principii, literally means asking for the very thing you set out to prove. So when J.L. Warren repeats it over and over, he isn't being annoying. He's applying one of the oldest known standards in clear thinking, and the witness keeps failing it live. And the closing is chef's kiss. J.L. Warren lays out the only honest path forward: demonstrate that God exists. Demonstrate it's defined the way you claim. Then show the actual mechanical connection between that God and the thing you keep pointing at. Do that, and you finally have an explanation. Skip it, and all you have is an assertion wearing a costume. Then he caps it off, looks at him, and goes, come on, man, this is basic philosophy. And he's right. This was never really a debate about whether God exists. It was a debate about whether the witness could follow one rule of logic for 10 straight minutes, and he couldn't. That's why this clip hits so hard. Not because somebody got embarrassed, but because reasoning itself actually won. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.